You're broke. You've always said I'm bankrupt. And I don't want to pretend anymore. Otherwise. Daniel Whitmore's voice trailed off. Like a blade piercing the ballroom. The 70 guests froze. He seized the opportunity for divorce. He slammed the papers on the table. Champagne glasses clinking inches from his wife's face. Flowers scattering. His fingers pierced the air between them. Now. In front of everyone. He would sign. Silence fell over the room. Claire looked at the newspaper first. Then at him. No tears. No trembling. She picked up the pen and signed slowly and carefully. Like a woman who had been waiting all along. She had no idea her billionaire family had gone down this path. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and stay tuned until the end. Please leave a comment telling us which cities show you're watching from. I want to see how far this story will go. It's been to other places. Daniel Whitmore's night of deciding to destroy his marriage in public had been planned for 3 years. Weeks. Not the divorce itself. But the fact that he'd wanted this for months. But its performance. The stage setup. And especially cruelly. The fact that they did this, holding their 5th anniversary celebration in front of everyone he cared about. In the rooftop ballroom near the Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago. The city skyline behind him shimmering like. He crowned himself. He had rehearsed what he was going to say. He had chosen that moment after the 3rd toast. When the champagne loosened. Everyone's tongues were lolling out. And the room was warm. Then they laughed. He had even told Victoria that she had talked about it the night before. And that she. He chuckled softly. Ecstatic. And pressed her perfectly manicured hand against his chest. Saying. It's time. That's Daniel Whitmore's style. He never does anything without an audience. I was 41. 6 feet 2 inches. And had a personality. The photographer's favorite chin and that kind of unguardable smile on my face. Before he went to a business meeting. He built the property that Whitmore and his partner owned. Transforming the rented south-facing office into a company with a $300 million portfolio. He was very perceptive. He knew how to make people feel like the ground beneath their feet was moving. And tonight. He decided to make Claire feel exactly that. He watched her from across the room. He spent a while in the ballroom first. And then. His actions. She was standing by a nearby window. A woman in a simple navy blue dress. Not overly designed. Not ostentatious. Just simple and elegant. She was quiet as always. Her dark hair was styled up. With a few stray strands hanging down. They had already loosened around her face. She talked to his boss. Margaret. About finance. And everything she said made Margaret laugh genuinely. That kind of laugh. A genuine laugh. It bothered him more than he expected. Just like that. Claire had always been like that. She had this quiet way of attracting people. She didn't have to work. She didn't have to act. There was no sharp social phenomenon. That machine everyone else used. Universal. Everyone liked her. They felt relaxed around her. First. 2 years after their marriage. It made Daniel proud. Then, the shift. I'm not quite sure exactly when. It did happen. But probably around the 3rd year. He stopped seeing her quietness as lacking elegance and started to see it as lacking grace. She didn't want to meet investors for dinner. She didn't want to wear the right jewelry or network with the right wives. She drove an ordinary car. Refused the personal expenses on the credit cards he offered her. And spent her free time reading or volunteering for the West Side Literacy Program. Whenever he asked her why she didn't want more, she would look at him with that look. I have everything I need, said Daniel. His deep gray eyes driving him to madness. Because in Daniel's world, wanting more was the only language that meant everything. You were either climbing or you were falling. There was no stillness. But his wife didn't see it that way. His desire to climb was overshadowed by the thought of his wife. She pulled him back. Victoria Hayes. She was the complete opposite of Claire in every way. He could measure. I met her when I was 14. A few months ago. At a real estate conference in Miami. She walked up to me. In the hotel bar. He cut to the chase. I've heard of Whitmore Realty. I think your thinking is too narrow. She was 36. Stunningly beautiful. She claimed to be the daughter of the Hayes family. Running business activities in the southeast region. She wore money the way some people wore other things. Perfume always a kind of presence. Before her. She knew every investor. In the room. They thought of the children. They called each other names and burst into laughter. They turned away. Daniel had told himself he thought it was business. For about 3 weeks. He had thought so. Victoria had come to Chicago twice. Consultations. Then 4. Then she booked a suite at the Meridian Hotel. In a semi-permanent way. And Daniel no longer pretended it was about business. He had been hiding something from Claire. It was easy. Claire trusted him. That was what made her so special. She extended the way she trusted others to generously lend credit without requiring any collateral. She never checked his phone. Never questioned him in the late-night office. Never attended any events. I didn't receive any invitations. In retrospect, he mistook her elegance for ignorance. Tonight, I stood across the ballroom watching her laugh with Margaret. Daniel felt something flash through him. It was discomfort. Not guilt. Exactly. More like its ghost. A feeling passed through him and disappeared before he even got there. He could name it. He picked up a new glass of champagne and turned to leave. Victoria appeared beside him. You look like you're having a second child. My thoughts. She said softly. I'm not. Okay. She patted his back. The touch was light as a feather. And he smiled at her. At the same time, someone on the other side of the room said, like those sophisticated socialites. Because I've already spoken with my family lawyer about the partnership. Reorganization. Once you're free. Understand. We can move on. All of this. Development. Merger. Everything. She turned around. Completely absorbed. Focus on him. This is what we've been working towards all along. Daniel. Don't be like that. Be gentle with me now. I said I'm not. He repeated. His voice growing louder. More than he expected. She raised her glass with a slight smile. Then walked away. He straightened his coat. Then picked up the microphone. The room fell silent. Immediately. There was another thing about Daniel. When he gave the order, people didn't notice it. But they gave it attention. Thoughts. I want to thank everyone. He began. It's an honor to be here tonight. The warmth in his voice was perfectly calibrated. The culmination of years of hard work. A boardroom exercise. 5 years. I can hardly believe it myself. Ripples of appreciative laughter. He smiled. 5 years of hard work to have achieved everything he had today. The company. His life. This city. He made an exaggerated gesture toward the skyline behind him. A glass. There were people in the room. Those who had been part of this journey had invested in this vision. And while others didn't believe, he was convinced. He paused. There were others who had been with me all along. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. Margaret's smile vanished. Claire was silent on the other side of the room. My wife. Daniel said. The word sounded like a category. Being fired. He turned to Claire. And to his PR team's cameras. The partisan stance. There to mark the anniversary. Had shifted toward her. Claire. Would you like to? Come on up. She walked toward him. She walked with steady steps. Without the slightest hesitation. Nervous. She moved through the crowd. With the calm that many would have. Later described as eerie. Not eerie because of the cold weather. But because she remained completely unmoved. As if. I had already accepted it all after knowing its shape for a long time. Before he spoke. She stood beside him. He looked at her. That moment. And later in his. It replayed itself. He would realize that it was. He should have stopped at that moment. There was a strange look in her eyes. Not anger. Nor anything else. It was pain. Not even resignation. Just clarity. Especially clear that the person who had made the decision hadn't stopped. I spent 5 years trying. He said. To create something great. He picked up the microphone. His voice growing louder. Now. The performance is on. The atmosphere is electric. I work 18 hours a day. I have been sacrificed. I overcame all the difficulties and setbacks. Every failed deal. Every moment that should have been easier to let go of. He shook his head. And what I realized was that when you've done all that, really done it, really built it, you need a partner who matches that energy. A contributor. Someone who can bring something to the meeting. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a stack of folded documents and placed them on the table beside him. He deliberately slowed his pace. Claire. He said. His voice was now almost gentle. This was the cruelest part. I think we all know you don't. Silence followed. The kind that presses against your ear. Margaret made a small sound and immediately swallowed her words. Someone in the back row of the room whispered something. Victoria stood at the edge of the crowd. Folding her hands carefully together. Claire. He looked at the documents on the table. Then she glanced at Daniel. You've always been a great partner, he said, now with an almost pity in his tone. Artificial. Empty. But I'm a man who needs someone who can keep up. Someone who understands what it takes to live at that level. He pushed the documents around slightly closer to her. These are the divorce papers. My lawyer has reviewed them. You will be well supplied. 4. He stepped back slightly, creating an atmosphere. The distance between them, even before she did, had already existed. Reply. I think it's time for us both. She kept going. I thought she would cry. He had actually planned it all along. I had imagined it. The exact form of her breakdown. And he had suppressed the feeling, secretly hiding himself away. He was responsible for it. He had expected her to come. She covered her mouth with her hand, watching as she frantically searched the room for help, trying to say something desperate and insignificant to confirm to all who watched that she was the kind of woman he had described. No resources. No bargaining chips. Nowhere to go. Instead, Claire picked up the pen that had been on the floor, on the table next to the champagne. She opened the bottle. She signed each page with a steady, efficient manner, as if someone was completing a routine task. She capped the pen, put it down, and pushed the file back to Daniel. Then she looked at him one last time. And then, there was no anger in her eyes. No pain. It looked almost like a relief. Thank you, Daniel, she said, her voice clear. In the silent room, she picked up the small evening bag she had taken from the table and turned toward the exit. The crowd inadvertently made way for her. Why? She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't look back at the elevator. While she waited, she took out her phone. She dialed. It rang twice. Dad, she said. Then her voice trembled slightly. Just once. Her composure cracked for the first time. 5 years. I'm ready. The time has come. They need to know who I really am. There was a moment of silence on the other end. A moment. Then, we've been waiting. You, dear. We'll be there in the morning. She hung up. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in and was there. Behind her, the rooftop ballroom. Its dazzling skyline view. Daniel Whitmore had already received congratulations from those who had once possessed him. He would laugh at the right moment. And call him ruthless a compliment. I had no idea that the woman who had just stepped out of the elevator was the beginning of everything he was about to do. Loss. Because that's how it is. Claire Bennett. It's important to understand this from the beginning. To feel the weight Daniel carried being thrown away. She never needed Daniel Whitmore. Not even for a day. She had chosen him. There was a profound difference between the two. Claire L. Bennett grew up in a house most people would tell from the pages of a financial magazine if they knew whose house it was. The Bennett family never appeared on the cover. They didn't seek profiles. Henry Bennett, Claire's grandfather, founded Bennett Global. Holding shares for over 50 years was a philosophy that the quietest money is the most powerful. And the worst way to lose an empire is to let the whole world see you holding it. Claire grew up there. Philosophy. And the way other children grew up was in a religious atmosphere. Not as a set of rules, to be precise, but a way of looking at things. The world. A way of understanding things as they are. And how they are almost never the same. Her eldest grandson. The heir. Technically. Though the Bennett family never used that word in front of her. She grew up because of Henry Bennett. Believing that those who knew they were the heir would stop working to prove they deserved the inheritance. She had a trust fund. Something she never touched. She had a name in New York that opened all doors. York. Chicago. Boston. And London. She never used it. She had a family I'd go through fire and water for. And one thing she'd asked them when she was 24 was simply to live as Claire. Not Claire Bennett. Not Henry Bennett's granddaughter. Just an ordinary woman she'd searched for who would love her. When there was nothing about her that was lovable except herself. Her father had argued with her. The world isn't kind to those without a name, William Bennett had once said. I know. Claire replied. I want to discover how kind people can be. He let her go because William Bennett knew his daughter. And he knew that when she made up her mind to do something, it flowed through her like a river. Through stone. Not in a rush. Not dramatically. Just steady and absolute certainty. She went to Chicago. She had worked at a nonprofit focused on urban housing development. The kind of work she did. She got all of this entirely on her own merits. An undergraduate thesis and a phone interview. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment. She lived in an apartment in Lincoln Park and then bought it. She bought her own groceries and learned how to manage a budget in a way completely different from what she had been exposed to since childhood, and found it somewhat surprising that she was good at it. It was interesting to know this, the actual weight of money, not an abstract concept. The weight of billions. But the weight of concrete was $342. The money that ended up in her checking account a month later taught her something about a world that no business school had ever set foot in. It taught her family. She met Daniel Whitmore at a city charity gala. Housing. He approached her at the bar. That's how he approached. Everyone had that forward-looking confidence that announced their arrival like a weather forecast. "I don't think I've seen you here before," he said before. "I haven't been here before," she replied. "What do you do for a living?" She said. "It's housing advocacy." "And you?" "Real estate development." He smiled. "We might actually have something to say about." They talked for 3 hours. She thought, was intelligent. Not the bright, widely read or deep-thinking kind. But quick. Intuitively sharp. Able to read the atmosphere in a room. Personal and financial statements. Translating them all into an action within seconds. He was ambitious. It was almost a physical touch. She could feel the heat emanating from him. And beneath his performance, beneath his perfect construction, she felt a charisma. She sensed something. She couldn't recall his name for a moment. It wasn't just about hunger, success was important. But meaning was too. Find someone to look at him. To confirm. He was the kind of person he thought he was. She felt something tugging at her. Not love. But something else. He'd called the next day and the third. He'd bluntly invited her to dinner, a refreshing change after years of dealing with men. She was discreet about her wealth. Respect surrounded her. Daniel had no idea. Who was she? He'd wanted to take her away. Invited her to dinner because he'd talked to her. 3 hours had passed. And he wanted to continue. She thought this was unusual. They'd been dating for a year. She'd told him on their third date that she came from money, not specifically money. Not even scale. Besides, she had a family. A comfortable background. And she'd chosen a different lifestyle. From that, he nodded and said, "Okay. For you." Then immediately turned the conversation back to the development stage of his project. And she had, "That's why I really like him." It wasn't concern. Because he was too engrossed in his own ambitions to be distracted by hers. She should have realized that then. A man completely consumed by himself is too ambitious, leaving almost no room for the realities of others. But she was 32 then. And she thought she loved him. And she thought love could make room in a room that didn't exist naturally. They were married off to someone else at a wedding that Daniel planned and paid for himself. And Claire encouraged her because she wanted him to begin with a sense of ownership over them. 60 people. A restaurant. And they all liked simple flowers. Not so. The Bennett family wedding was for their eldest daughter. Her grandmother cried quietly. For reasons she claimed to be happy. But that wasn't what Claire meant. A message. This marriage was built on what we are not. What we have. Year 1. She was once very happy. Genuinely happy. In 2nd grade. She began to notice the first fine cracks. Jokes about her car. At first it was small. He said with a laugh. "My wife. She drives. I drive a 6-year-old Honda. Ladies and gentlemen. It's a company car." But after repeating it several times, they stopped. "Just kidding." Comments on her attire at business dinners. He would describe her to new acquaintances. Claire didn't actually have a formal profession. No longer. She did some volunteer work. This was no longer a historical revisionism. She never stopped working. She once directly refused a promotion. To accommodate his schedule. It was a sacrifice she did without prior notice. He had absorbed all the thanks. In the 3rd year, the comments became more pointed. He had started acting as if he didn't realize what he was doing. Doing so. And describing their finances. A life entirely narrated in the first person. My company. My investments. My building. She wasn't listed as a contributor. A partner. But as a beneficiary. A woman whose comfortable life was a product of his efforts. She had twice tried to have an honest conversation about it. The first time he told her she was being sensitive. The second time he told her he felt she was ungrateful. After that, she stopped trying to correct it. He told her the story about them. Not because she agreed, but because she understood very clearly that it stemmed from genuine, attentive observation of Daniel Whitmore. And he didn't revise his narrative. He amplified them. She began to quiet down. Deciding what to do, this kind of invisible work, about the matter. She didn't tell her family. Not in detail. Her father had called her a month later. And she gave him a shape. Saying that things without substance were good. That the job was interesting. Autumn in Chicago was beautiful. She could feel him listening intently to that. She didn't say anything. And commendably. He waited. He didn't push. He trusted her. To find her moment. She had trusted herself and found it too. Then Daniel met Victoria Hayes in Miami. Claire knew before he told her. Didn't she? Because she hadn't found anything explicit. Not because she had gone to look for it. But because she knew Daniel. And she knew his unique quality of being easily distracted when something new came along. It caught his attention. He became the man of both. More active. Yet more absent. With ample capacity for performance, that's usually how it is. But now she wasn't really there anymore. She didn't say a word. She witnessed it all. She quietly began to prepare. Those who later marveled at Claire's achievements, appearing composed at the anniversary party, would replay the video and discuss when she picked up that pen with the unwavering determination in her eyes. Wouldn't know that this composure was built upon 18 months of meticulous, solitary work. She wasn't passive during that time, enduring pain, but taking methodical action. Documenting consultations with lawyers, she hired them privately and paid them cash. She deliberately set aside some money for this purpose. She slowly extended her hand. The father's honesty deepened with each passing year in the initial conversation. She hadn't waited for rescue. She had been waiting for the right moment. She finally had a chance to save herself. The fact that the anniversary party wasn't being held surprised her. She had long suspected something was about to happen. Not something concretely dramatic. Not a public humiliation. But some kind of declaration. Daniel had been moving for months. Constantly seeking an exit. Never one to leave quietly. What had surprised her was the weight that had fallen to the ground, a room. 70 people. And laughter arose so easily. As Margaret glanced down at her shoes. The camera panned to her. She stood there. Pen in hand. A smile on her face. Her hand. She felt something move. It wasn't humiliation to her. She had decided months ago. She wouldn't allow Daniel to define the meaning of everything that had happened between them. Yet not a profound connection. She calmed her grief. But not for herself. For the version of him she had married. The person she had believed in freshman year, he might become that person. She had loved him deeply. Indeed. Regardless of other facts. That was the truth. She signed the documents. When she thanked, in that quiet room, she was serious. Because he had ultimately sold her out. To reveal before witnesses that it was an irreversible, clear decision. What she needed most before was for him to come home. And that was his own reason. Not hers. But everyone's ending, those present would understand. She had spent 5 years carrying his burden. Narration. She finished in the elevator. Her father's voice, which had accompanied her down to the lobby, still echoed warmly in her ears. Darling. We've been waiting for you. Claire Bennett pressed her back against the wall, letting herself take a long, trembling breath. Then she straightened up. The door opened. She stepped into the Chicago night. Into a tower in the city with her. The family name on the office deed spanned 4 countries. With 17 subsidiaries. A machine began to move. No violence. No loud noise. The Bennett family hadn't yet built their noise empire. It flowed like water. Daniel Whitmore stood there in the rooftop ballroom, receiving discreet congratulations from those. He was already planning a divorce. This might mean their investments didn't think the situation had reversed. He handed the pen to his wife. She had already signed it. And now, the real story is about the beginning. The following night at the anniversary party, Daniel Whitmore slept better than he had in months. He told himself he felt a sense of relief. A clean, simple remedy for a decision had finally been written. The door was finally closed. He had done what he had to do. He had been honest. Ruthless. Openly honest. And now the path forward was clear. Victoria texted him at midnight. Proud of you. Tomorrow we're going to do something really meaningful. He had read the book. Twice. With the phone screen down, he turned his head to the bedside table and closed his eyes. He really didn't want to think about Claire's expression when she signed it. He didn't think about how she thanked him. Those 2 words lingered in the air. And he couldn't fully immerse himself in the ballroom atmosphere. Explaining why Margaret looked so different. The laughter in the room stopped abruptly. A little too quickly. He didn't think about how she hadn't cried. Not once. Not a single tear. In front of 70 audience members who had just watched the show. Her husband had announced to the world she was worthless. He told himself that meant she didn't care. It proved to be true. That was a woman who truly felt. The severity of the loss would say it all. He fell asleep at 12:47. The next morning at 6:15. His phone rang. It was his boss, Richard Hale, the COO. And Richard never called before 8 unless it was something important. Something was wrong. Daniel answered the ring on the third ring. What was it? You need to come in. Richard's voice sounded a little tense. Daniel had never heard of him before. Richard Hale was the most composed and level-headed person Daniel had ever employed. 15 years in commercial real estate. He had weathered market crashes, contract defaults, and a land planning scandal that nearly led to disaster. He hadn't raised his voice. His tense voice sounded different now. Now, Daniel. Before the board meeting. This board meeting wasn't until 10 a.m. They had moved to 8. A pause. But they weren't. They came alone. Daniel sat up. What? What did that mean? Who was coming with them? Richard hadn't said a word for 2 whole hours. A few seconds. In itself. Was a unique experience to answer. Richard would also be coming with them. Bennett Global Holdings. Richard said their management team and Daniel. Others were coming for a longer pause. William Bennett himself. Daniel's first reaction was confusion. Pure bewilderment. Because the name Bennett Global Holdings didn't come to mind, it wasn't associated with anything personal. It was the name he knew from financial media. One of the largest media outlets. The country's private investment firm. Notoriously opaque. Rarely public. The kind of institutional funds that flow silently through the market, leaving no trace. Fingerprints. He had twice tried to get a meeting with someone from the acquisition department. And both times he had been politely referred. Why is Bennett Global about to join my board meeting? He said slowly. That's me. I'm trying to figure it out, Richard said. But Daniel. They didn't ask for a meeting. They announced one. Their office called at 5 a.m. This morning. Our board secretary. And they said they would be there at 8 a.m. And the existing agenda needed to be paused. Our board secretary. Before she could even confirm. Blurted out yes. With me. Daniel was already up. Already started moving. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Minutes. He succeeded at 32. The lobby of Whitmore Properties headquarters on Michigan Avenue was already quite different. He felt he could name it as soon as he walked in. The receptionist looked up at him with a certain expression on her face. She was trying to remain neutral. 2 men he didn't recognize stood there. Near the elevator lobby. Not a security issue. But the staff were no exception. The gestures of a specific group of people. An organization that possesses and understands those resources. They looked at Daniel with gentle eyes. Assessing their attention. He was told to wait for him. He walked past them silently and took the elevator to the executive floor. Richard was waiting for him outside. The conference room. He was 53. A worldly man whose ever-present expression was too powerful to be swayed. But this morning. His jaw was clenched. His eyes moving in the same way they moved as he was rapidly doing mental arithmetic. Speak. Daniel said. Bennett Global held 14% of Whitmore Properties. Richard said. As it had been for the past 4 years. It came out smoothly and quickly. Richard provided the information he knew. It was going to fall hard. Anonymous. 3 holding companies were built through investment vehicles. I pulled out the original capital documents this morning. It was there. I just never traced it back to the source because there was no reason to pay attention. Daniel stared at him. Technically. 14%. Or 14.3%. Makes them our second largest shareholder. Daniel's voice sounded strange. Like. The sound came from another room. Yes. 4 years. Yes. Daniel turned to look at the conference room door. Through the glass. He could see people were already there. Seated around a long table. His board members. People he'd known for years. Those who'd attended his anniversary party last night. Including some faces he didn't recognize, expensive suits. Cautious expressions. The restrained energy of someone in a position of importance. They held cards. But weren't in a hurry to reveal them. At the head of the table. His chair. His seat. The chair he'd been sitting in for 9 minutes years ago. He recognized a man sitting there. A photograph. William Bennett. 64. Silver-haired. With a calm that didn't stem from passivity, but from absolute confidence. He wasn't looking at the door. He was reading. He calmly took something from a folder. As if to say, he was in his office back then. "Is that Claire?" Daniel began. "She hasn't arrived yet," Richard said. Daniel pushed open the conference room door. Everyone turned to look. And William Bennett looked up from him at the folder. His eyes met Daniel's. A man's unhurried precision. Decades spent reading other men's portfolios. And the contents of those portfolios were not so. Hostility. That was more than that. More unsettling than hostility. It was the assessment that was complete, swift, and finished. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. Not with warmth but with indifference. Simply stating the facts. "Mr. Bennett." Daniel walked to the table and extended his hand. "I didn't know we were supposed to have a meeting." William Bennett shook his hand. A firm and brief gesture. Concise. Dismissive. "Sit down. Please." Daniel had something signed in his chest. This was his meeting room. His table. His chair. Except for the fact that William Bennett was already sitting inside. The geometry of the room had shifted around this fact. And Daniel found himself sitting in the third seat. Unconsciously lowering his position. "I'll wait for my COO. Richard can join us." "Yes," William said. His tone was calm. As if he already knew about Richard. He stated their names and titles as if he had known them for a long time. For a while. He closed the folder. In front of him. "We have some things to discuss before we formally begin. If you don't want to do this, it's best to be straightforward. Mind." "Of course," Daniel said. Then he went out with pride in the flatness of his voice. "Bennett Global Holdings has been a company since, has been Whitmore Properties William. An investor in the Series B funding round. Said. That was 4 years ago. Back then, the company was under-collateralized. And there were 2 contracts pending. There was a risk of the project failing due to a funding gap. Are you aware of this?" Daniel felt the room tremble slightly. "I am aware of our early funding history." "Yes. Are you aware that both contracts were saved by introducing a measure? Is it problematic that an anonymous new investor filled the capitalization gap?" "I know about the period when we introduced new investment," Investor Williams said. Patiently. Like someone making something. He made sure every word was on point. "It's a vehicle I built. Daughter. Claire Bennett Whitmore." He paused. Letting it settle. "Your wife." The ensuing silence wasn't the usual quiet. It was the kind of silence that had a pressing weight on. There were people sitting inside. Daniel's jaw tightened. Across the table. His 2 board members. Philip Garrett and Susan Chin. Were both at the party. The night before. I looked at the table. Very much attention was paid to its finish. Daniel said. "My wife doesn't have any investment tools." William watched him treat him with a kind of inappropriate pity. Not outright contempt. But life itself. In the space between them. "Sir. Whitmore." He said calmly. It was this statement that told me about everything I needed to know about the nature of your marriage." He opened the folder again. Then slid a document into it. The table. This was the original investment agreement. My daughter's signature was on page 4. Her initials were mentioned in every subsequent amendment. He crossed his arms. "She owned 14%. I have been a shareholder of your company for 4 years. She reviewed your third-quarter report. She determined that irregularities in the second year of the Riverside contract could result in an $8 million loss if the money was spent on clothes." He paused. "She quietly fixed it. She didn't tell you because she's your wife. And she felt that way." The partner did. Daniel was looking at the document. He was reading the signature on page 4. He recognized her handwriting. How do you recognize the handwriting of someone you've lived with for 5 years? She leaned slightly to the left. As she had done when she walked around the sea in Clare County. It was her signature. Undeniably. Sitting on a document he had never seen before. "Why?" he said. His voice much lower than before. "He did it on purpose. Had she never told me?" It was Richard who answered the phone. The doorway where he had been standing was quiet. "I think," Richard said cautiously. That was a question to her. The door opened. Claire walked in. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit. Perfectly tailored. Impeccably tailored. Clothes belonging to a certain type of person. Unlike anything Daniel had seen in her wardrobe. Her hair was loose. Straight and flowing. She carried a leather briefcase as she sat at the table. Taking out. He sat in his chair, not glancing at Daniel. Not at all. She looked at her father. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm late." "You're not late," William said, with that warmth in his voice, that unique tone of his. So complete, so direct, that the change was almost visible. The room temperature. We had only just begun. Claire opened her case of files. She unzipped a set of folders and began distributing them around the table. Efficiently. Someone who's done this many times. Somehow. Who feels comfortable in this room? That had nothing to do with Daniel. The names on the lease. Daniel watched her hands. He observed the board's movement. Members. His board members. Philip and Susan and James Whitfield. And Karen Okerford took folders from her, with something that seemed a little uncomfortable. Like a sign of respect. Impolite acceptance of someone receiving handouts. People's focus on the information they're getting from a source of respect. "Claire," he said. She looked at him then. Directly. Calmly. Without anger or lingering pain. That was exactly the clear understanding he saw. The elevator that made him uneasy. He could tell why. "We'll talk about that later," she said. It was all of it. There were many things, covered up. "I think we need to talk about it privately. First. We're past that stage," she said. Simply. Not too harsh. Simply put. "Open the folder and turn to page 3. He opened the folder. The folder. The third page was the financials. He concluded that he had approved his company's balance sheet from the first quarter to the third quarter of this year, but with his notes above it. Never seen before. 2 pages of colored margins. He didn't recognize a series of marked line items corresponding to dates and transaction codes. He looked at the top of the page. The dates in these notes spanned an 18-month period. "What was this?" he said. "This is what I'd been doing," Claire said. "You were telling her then that I didn't contribute anything to these people. No heating. Just more." If she shouted it out loud, the consequences would be unimaginable. The third page was a noted balance sheet. Sheets. The 5th page was Meridian contract analysis. The 8th page was Caldwell's developmental abnormality. She paused. Started from page 8. He turned to page 8. He read for 40 seconds. Then looked up. "This was Caldwell's account," he said slowly. "These were transfers. 11 Claire. Completed within 7 months of transfer confirmation. To the 3 shell companies registered in Delaware within 90 days. Victoria Hayes joined as a consultant on the project." She was watching him intently. "You want me to explain the connections between the shell companies? Do you want to read it yourself?" The room fell silent. Daniel put down the folder. His hands, he vaguely noticed, weren't entirely steady. "Victoria," he began, "is not the person you think she is," Claire said. "Not triumphant, but rather unremarkable. The way you state the facts is established. She has been diverting the topic of company funding for development projects. Her family owns 60% of the company. Use the consulting contract you provided as a starting point." A pause. "The total amount of the redirection is approximately $4.7 million. Philip Garrett made a sound from across the table. Susan Chen was scribbling something quickly in the margins, holding a copy of the report in her hand. Daniel looked at William Bennett. William was watching him with the same calm, appraising attitude. His expression at this moment was not one of satisfaction. Things were worse. More important than satisfaction. It's patience. Who has ever read this story and known exactly how things would unfold? Things gradually became clear. And who just waited? Let another person catch up. "How long do you know?" Daniel said to Claire. "Victoria. 8 months. 8 months." Daniel involuntarily calculated backwards. 8 months ago was January. In January, he got Victoria. She learned from the consulting contract that she had received help from. "To begin with, you didn't say anything. I need to know the whole picture." "Document sorting takes time," Claire said. She looked at him with something unusual, though cold. It was the nearest neighbor. "I don't want to make a mistake on this. I want to be sure." "You are." "I'm gathering evidence," he said. "I was protecting the company," she said. "That's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. Whether you know it or not." Richard walked from the doorway to a seat at the table. He was reading his book. The report said his expression shifted. The surprise turned to frustration in an instant. "Daniel," Richard said softly. "Cardwell transferred schools. They were marked. Date. The three of them were in the same place on the date of the board resolution you signed. I didn't know what I was signing at the time. I knew. Richard said. That's it. It worries me. He said. Looking up. Because someone stole your signature on the document. You didn't read it carefully. And someone can see your schedule, your office, and your trust. Victoria. Victoria had been in his house for 14 months. Track. The one who told him she was proud of him. The one who texted him last night at midnight. Daniel took out his phone. There were 14 unread texts from Victoria. Starting at 6:48 a.m. that morning. He didn't look at them. He set his phone screen upside down on the table. What's next? He said. It was William Bennett who answered. That depends. He said. The decision you make among the next few options for a few hours. He straightened up. The movement of his jacket smooth and fluid, the kind of man who never rushed. Because he always had everything under control. Bennett Global will be submitting a formal report to you regarding Caldwell's board misconduct. The report will also include all our accounts and the company's investment history, including the role my daughter played as an anonymous stakeholder advisor. He looked at Daniel. His eyes vacant. Expression. I encourage your full cooperation with the review process. If I can't. William Bennett smiled. Then, briefly. The way the man smiled, the answer to a question he'd just been asked was self-evident. He said, Mr. Whitmore, the foundation you built for the company is very solid. It was my daughter who helped pave it. You have just had my daughter discarded like trash in front of everyone. And now you're sitting in a conference room, unable to control the majority of the votes at this table. He picked up his folder. What if? What would happen? Your lack of cooperation isn't one of them. It takes a vivid imagination. He walked to the door, paused, and glanced back. Claire will be chairing the next meeting. Part of the meeting, he said. Then he walked out. Silence fell over the room. A different scene unfolds around him when he's not around. Daniel looks at the people around him. At the table are people he's known for years. Those who once laughed at him with him at last night's anniversary party. He sees every face facing the same rapid recalculation. The same silent shifts in loyalty washing over him like a tide. Claire opens her file box to the freshly baked section. Let's start with this. The Caldwell account, she said. Her voice incredibly professional. Completely finished. I'll go through it. We'll draw up a timetable first. Then we'll open it. Question. Daniel sat at the table. His name etched on the building above. He listened as his wife dissected everything he thought he knew. Owning his own company and maintaining a calm, precise approach, the man who had been doing this job for 4 years. It was terrifying. Finally. The light. And under the shock. Under the dull hum of information. Rewriting his understanding of the last things. 4 years. Even in the cold. Victoria's actions terrified me. Beneath all this. One thought surfaced and lingered. He had stood before 70 people. Telling them that she had nothing in her room and that she had sat there signing. Not because she had nothing. But because she had. He had decided not to. Worth correcting. The board meeting was in progress for 4 hours. Claire introduced a man with fluent financial analysis skills. Someone who hadn't assembled it overnight. But who had been building it all along. Methodically. Month by month. Layer by layer. The way you build things means permanence. She had documented everything. Claims. She had dates. Transaction codes. And communications logs. Philip Garrett asked a question. And she answered. She answered before he even finished asking. Susan Chin objected to this interpretation. Claire extracted the Meridian data. The secondary documentation involved was precisely this objection. Already in place. Prepared. Tabulated. Richard Daniel looked at her with an expression he'd never seen on an COO's face. He spent nearly an hour recognizing it. It was respect. A special respect for a professional. Acknowledging the work of someone else, a professional who had reached a certain level, and it commanded it to do so. 2 hours later. Karen Affleck put down her pen and said. Claire. How long have you been doing this? This kind of analysis? Claire looked at her. Before I married Daniel, she said simply, it was my family business. It was investing. I've lived here since I was a child. Karen glanced at Daniel. Then at Claire. She said nothing. But the look on her face, the look said it all. Part of Victoria Hayes's presentation was the toughest hour Daniel had ever endured. In professional settings. He had weathered 3 market downturns and a federal audit. Claire laid out a clear shell company structure that had been fully mapped out. Delaware registration information, ownership history, and dates for the transfer of contracts with consultants. She had the communication skills to establish a record between Victoria and a contact she had acquired shares in Hayes Development. She had done so legally and documentedly through what she called channels. She delivered her presentation without drama, without editorials, letting the evidence speak for itself. It was heartbreaking. By the time she finished, the room had a feeling. The place where the irreversible had happened had just happened. The particular atmosphere that followed the moment of truth was too great to retract. James Whitfield, who had been silent for 3 hours, said, "We need to report this to the relevant authorities. The documents are ready to be submitted. I can provide a copy too," Claire said. "Today's board meeting. We also need to address the following issues: administrative oversight." "What's next?" Susan Chan said, glancing at Daniel as she spoke. Daniel sat motionless. He had been sitting motionless for most of the past 4 hours, which was not his natural state. Daniel Whitmore was a. The room was packed with people, moving between meeting rooms, with the momentum of progress. They never let go. Silence quietly descended around him. "Fill it." He sat quietly. He wasn't calm at this moment. It was a man trying to digest some information, yet trapped in a state of stillness, rewriting his own history in real time, trying to piece together the fragments. Over the past 4 years, he had gradually adapted to his new state of life. Recognize. Claire had always been there. Alone. Instead of silently enduring the pain. Instead of waiting to be saved. Working. Observing. Building a parallel record of everything. He thought he was building it alone. This woman he called bankrupt was the invisible framework of his success. The formal part of the meeting ended, and people began to migrate, reaching for their phones, gathering documents. They whispered about purposeful actions, projects, and deadlines. Daniel found himself alone at one end of the long table. Claire was talking to Richard. Near the door. Whatever she was saying, Richard nodded the same way he always did, completely when he agreed to something. Daniel stood up. "Claire." She paused the conversation. She looked at him. He crossed the room. Not with. He maintained his usual forward momentum, but slower, with less force, until he was certain he was standing before her. He said, "Because that's the only one. The truth he could find. I couldn't." "I know." She looked at him for a long time. A moment. "I know you didn't," she said. "Daniel. That was never the point. The point wasn't that you didn't know." She stared at me. "The point was that you never asked." She turned to look at Richard. Daniel stood there. He thought about how they had been together for 6 years. Always dating. Then they got married. And he tried to count how many times he'd asked her about her work. About her family. About everything she knew. About her true self beyond his story. About her. He counted on his fingers. And then stopped. He gave many examples before he ran out of fingers. He was always convinced he knew her. He never verified it. Richard met his gaze as it swept quickly over Claire's shoulder. Richard, who had worked with Daniel for 9 years. Richard had navigated every crisis around him. There was no contempt on Richard's face. He was tired. Particularly tired of witnessing a preventable event happen. And he was standing on the other side. "I need to visit my Daniel," Daniel said. Because that was the office. Practical problems to solve. And more practical things to take care of. A bigger factor than any other pressure on him. "Of course," Claire said, without turning around. "Nobody's going to lock you up. Get out." "Daniel. This isn't a coup." Pause. "The board will meet again on Friday. To answer governance questions. You should have your lawyer present." He nodded. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned away again. He wasn't sure what he really wanted. That is to say, deep down he wanted to say something that would make her understand. Something that would ruin her professional demeanor. She was dressed like armor. And then she reached the person below. Part of him needed to know if that person was still there if he hadn't completely destroyed it. But Claire was already thinking. The documents in front of her had begun to move forward. Already occupying the space she was in, clearly. It had always belonged here. She was focused and composed. She made it clear she had no energy. The remaining time was spent thinking about Daniel's question. Whitmore's feelings. He had spent 5 years on it. And no one had asked her about it for years. The accounting work had begun. He stepped out of the elevator. Through the elevator. Through the two men who were still there. Standing near the elevator. Who else had watched him leave with the same gentle expression? They had watched intently as he walked through the glass doors into Michigan Avenue. The morning air fresh and invigorating. The city was completely undeveloped. He realized that Daniel Whitmore's understanding of his own life had just begun to be completely rewritten. He stood on the sidewalk. His phone vibrated. It was Victoria again. He looked at the screen. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you all morning. You've been here. Call me." He glanced at the text message. It had been a long time. "I was thinking about what Claire had said. 8 months. She'd known him for 8 months. She sat across from him at dinner every week. I'd been bringing him coffee for 8 months. In the morning." He answered his questions. He was asked about his schedule. The composure and efficiency she displayed, I knew it all perfectly well. What Victoria Hayes had done for his company, when he told people his wife he hadn't contributed anything. She could have told him back in January. She could have walked in with the first document. I could have handed it to him. And then watched his expression, by any angle. He deserved it. It was fair. Even far beyond fair. She hadn't done that. She had protected the documents for the company. Done it right. Completed it entirely because she wanted to be certain. Because she didn't want wrong. Because. And it had fallen into his hands. A heavy weight pressed against his chest. He was unprepared because. Even then. She was still trying to do things the way he had built the company. Even though he was about to leave. About to humiliate her in front of 70 people. He put his phone in his pocket without answering. He stood on Michigan Avenue. The sharp feeling of the morning felt longer than he could clearly remember. Utterly alone. Not the productive loneliness of a self-made man who didn't need anyone. The other kind. The kind that lives in the gap between the two. The kind of belief you hold about life and what you think it is. That's just how your life is. He began to understand the gap, which had always been exactly the width of the woman he had met. Never bothered to understand. He didn't go back to his office. Afternoon. For the first time in 9 years, Daniel Whitmore, head of the real estate company Whitmore, had nowhere to go. And that feeling was just like his. The meeting room belonged to the meeting he had just left. His 14th floor office now had the special qualities of a room that had been seen by someone who knew the situation better than I did. He started sleeping in his office in his apartment. The one he'd moved into 3 weeks earlier. Avoiding conversation with Claire. Then 42. On a floor above Michigan Avenue. And with all the warm, forgotten hotel rooms he'd ever owned. He drove. He drove north along Lakeside Boulevard aimlessly. The way he'd driven at 26. With nothing to his name. Yet believing in the movement. In progress. The right side of the lake was gray and wide. He didn't really look at it. He was in charge of the board at the time. Meetings looped in his mind. Assembling and reassembling the parts. Claire's voice was flat and clear. This was page 8 of the document. Richard was tired. Eyes. William Bennett's smile. It wasn't a real smile. $4.7 million. Shell Company. Delaware registered. Victoria's name was everywhere. Like a live wire. He'd been holding it. His phone had 41 notifications by noon. He pulled up on a side street. And I sat down. The engine started. And he scrolled through them. He was still inside. Reading the disaster damage report with that detached, masculine focus. Victoria had called 9 times and sent 16 text messages. The tone of these messages changed throughout the morning. First, casual conversation. Then questions. Then sharp. Then a certain controlled quality. The degree to which someone had been informed was readjusting something they knew. Her last text was sent at 11:47. It read, "I know you were in a meeting. Morning. We need to talk before then. It's out of control. Call me before then. Things are getting out of control." Daniel read this sentence. The sentence was repeated 3 times. I thought of the 14 months he had known Victoria Hayes. He thought of Miami and, in the hotel bar, when she said, "I think you're too narrow-minded." He thought it was the highest possibility. Praise because it fit perfectly. His opinion of himself. He thought of that consulting contract. The one he gave her in January that gave her the opportunity to participate in the Caldwell project. He thought of the board resolution. Claire had already marked those connected to him. He signed it. Those signatures he possessed. Because he signed it without reading it carefully. Victoria told him it was all routine. Because he trusted her. Because he had believed in this particular kind of blindness, a man who confused desire with. Victoria Hayes keenly sensed his potential was obvious. She had seen it clearly. Okay. He didn't call her back. He put the car in drive and drove on. By 2 o'clock. He was already seated. He had returned to a cafe in Everston. A place he had never been before. Sitting at a table with a cup of coffee. He wasn't. He drank. He opened his laptop. The Caldwell Project documents. He had been reading for 40 minutes. And the image gathering before him was worse. The more closely he examined, the more he did so because of Claire's deal. The marked, unhidden items were right in the documents he had access to. He hadn't looked for them before. He had already reviewed the summary report. He took Victoria's oral briefing. He signed it. To be placed before him by a woman because she was beautiful, therefore trustworthy, ambitious, and told him he was exceptional. He was exactly the kind of fool she needed him to be. His private lawyer called when he was 223. Daniel. I just got a call from Bennett's global legal team. Philip Morton said Philip was 60. Had been Daniel's lawyer for 7 years. A man's voice. Weighing everything before he spent the money. They are submitting a formal disclosure to the board regarding the Caldwell account irregularities. The submission will include Shell's relevant documents, ownership structure, and a request for forensic accounting review. Suspension. As far as I know, they are also preparing a separate communications regulatory body. What does that mean to me? Daniel said. It depends entirely on the forensic investigation and review results. Another pause. More discussion. Daniel. Do you know the nature of these transfers? No. Daniel said. I signed the resolution without reading it. Victoria handled the operational details. Okay. Philip's voice was cautious. With a man's characteristic reserve. Choosing a difficult road terrain. So your position is that you were misled and your trust was exploited by a contractor. That was a defensible position with supporting documents and relevant information. You will fully cooperate with the investigation. Claire's documents confirm this. Daniel said. And something else. The brevity of that statement. The fact that his best defense is the masterpiece of the woman he just publicly talked about. Landing in such a humiliating way that it makes the coffee shop feel small. Claire Bennett's documents. Philip repeated slowly. Daniel. How much of this is? Does she know? How long will it last? 8 months. Daniel said she's known her for 8 years. Months. A silence on the other end lasted a full 4 seconds. To Philip Morton. 4 seconds of silence. Equivalent to another person slamming his chair down. She wrote it down and said. Nothing. Philip finally said. She said nothing. To protect the company. Yes. Another pause. Daniel. Philip said. There was something strange in his voice now that wasn't there in the first place on the phone. Something not quite like it. But it was right there. I've been your lawyer for 7 years. I've witnessed firsthand the extraordinary things you've accomplished. He stopped. I want you to hear my thoughts. Not as your lawyer, but as someone who has known you for some time, though. Say it. Philip said. That woman just saved your company. And maybe, there are 70 people ahead of you in the freedom you gained after humiliating her. That's not something you'd handle in a day. That's not something that can be explained over the phone. He didn't press further. I'll make sure what happens next. You'll understand the full weight in a few weeks. Daniel said nothing. I'll contact you as soon as I know. Philip said there was more information about the schedule. In the meantime, do not contact Victoria Hayes. I won't. Daniel. A final pause. Cooperate with everything. All of it. Without hesitation. He hung up. Daniel sat there with his dead phone in his hand. His cup of coffee sat motionless in front of him. He thought carefully about what Philip had said. That woman just saved your company. Maybe it can give you your freedom. He thought about how efficiently Claire had distributed folders in the conference room, someone who had meticulously prepared them. Someone who had organized all the documents so that anyone could find the truth. He considered the notes. The marginal notes on page 318 had been in her handwriting for months. He used the same handwriting. He'd seen the cards and notes she'd left on his desk on shopping lists and birthday lists. His late-night notes. Things like dinner in the fridge. Don't forget the Harrington meeting, the same handwriting he'd quietly left before. Keeping the company running invisibly. He'd studied that handwriting carefully for 5 years. 4 years. I'd only read the surface. He closed his laptop. He paid for his coffee and left. He went back to his car and sat for a while. No need to start it. And then he did. It was something he hadn't done in a long time. He remembered it clearly. He called his mother. Ellen Whitmore answered with the second ring. Which meant she'd been waiting for his call. Which meant she'd seen the news. Which meant the anniversary party. Or some other form of it had been delivered to her in Phoenix, where she'd retired 3 years earlier. Baby, she said. And that word. Specific in its warmth. Its unconditional quality. Only a mother could do. Hit him in a place he hadn't expected. I saw it. This morning. Someone uploaded a video. Daniel closed his eyes. How much? Enough. Her voice was cautious. She had gotten this opportunity while managing her own company. And her reaction was to make room for him. Enough to know that you said something impossible. Unspoken words. He said nothing. Daniel. Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more firm. What? Have you ever encountered this situation? Where did this person come from? From. Because I raised a boy who understands these things. How to treat people. I know. You. Because the man in the video looked at his wife like a problem. He thought she was a nuisance. Solved. She paused. Claire isn't a problem. Claire is a person. I know. Mom. No, she said softly. I don't think you've done it. I think you no longer understand. Somewhere. The story he told you was completely different. She exhaled. I liked Claire the first time I saw her. Her. Do you remember what I told you? He remembered. He brought Claire to the first Thanksgiving in Phoenix. And his mother pulled him aside. She went into the kitchen and said it bluntly. Never lost. It can see you. Not the company. Not the profession. You didn't do anything stupid. You told me not to be. Stupid. He said. She said he pressured her. His head was pressed against the headrest. And I was such an idiot. She was silent for a moment. Her voice was still firm when she spoke. But there seemed to be something else in it. Something deeper. Tell me what happened, the company. Not the party. But the company. He said. He told her. Not all of it. Not all of Caldwell's complex documentation. The Victoria Shell Company. The transfers. The board meeting that morning. Claire's 4 years of obscurity. The mother listened quietly without interrupting. This was unusual for her. When he finished, there was silence. As if she had absorbed it all into a precise shape. So she built it with. You. Alan said. She built it with. She said. She built it with. You. You didn't know. I didn't know. I knew. You also said she went bankrupt. I have nothing to say about him. Is there anything satisfactory? Daniel Thomas Whitmore, his mother said. And all 3 names were once hers. He dedicated his life to those moments. Rigorous accounting work. You're going to fix this not because it's legally wise. Not because it's not. Because it's good for the company. You'll fix it because it's what I should do because I didn't raise someone who let this kind of mistake happen. Size misalignment. Pause. Do you understand what I mean? Yes. Ma'am. Okay. Her voice softened slightly. I love you. And I'm very disappointed in you. Both of these things are true at the same time. He drove back to the city. The next 72 hours proceeded in a controlled manner. The violence caused by structural collapse. Not chaos, but inevitable. Each item was arranged in physical order after the foundation's donations were presented in a manner that was requested. On Thursday morning, the global legal team of the accounting firm hired by forensic expert Bennett arrived at the Whitmore property and began the assessment. There were 4 people there with laptops, speaking in hushed tones, and requesting entry. The record of polite, ruthless people knows how to improve the efficiency of people who find things and intend to find everything. Richard coordinated their visit, handling a crisis that was not of his own making with a highly restrained manner. That morning, Daniel came to the office. He came because Philip had instructed him to do so. Cooperation. Because another option during his company's operation, which he had been keeping an eye on, felt like a concession. He was not ready. But people were becoming increasingly clear about what he really was and what he was not. And the question was worth exploring. Preparation had become essentially irrelevant. He met Claire in the hallway outside. Accounting department. 9:40. She was with 2 members of Bennett's global legal team. With someone proactive, goal-oriented, with a full schedule, and also moving through it. She was wearing charcoal gray clothes. Buy another one. Or something similar. She was carrying a leather file bag. She saw him slow down. But not stop. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He stopped. He couldn't not. "Are you free?" She glanced at the two lawyers. He quietly took 2 steps back. The professionalism of people accustomed to this moment. She turned to Daniel. "2. In a few minutes," she said. "I have a call. 10 o'clock. He had been trying to organize what he had wanted to say since parking the car the day before at the repair shop in Everston. And now, standing before her, he found none of it organized properly. "My mother," he said. Something had changed. Claire's face. Small but real. His mother. Ellen. Who had called Claire their best gift for their first Christmas together. "How is she?" Claire asked. The question genuine. "Disappointed in my heart," he said. "She said she likes you. From the first time she met you." "I like her too." Claire looked at him. "Daniel. I know what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to complicate things. It has to be this way. You could have told me." He talked about Victoria 8 months ago. She met his gaze. "Yes. Why don't you?" She was silent for a moment. Then he sensed she was hesitant. "But how much of it is true? Say it." "Because I'm not sure what you do with it," she finally said. "If I had a month, I would have informed you immediately." The transaction was marked and it indicated that Victoria had stolen company property. "You would have asked me how I knew. I could have had the opportunity to present this investment to you. About 4 years." She paused. "And I don't know if you're ready to hear that. I don't know whether telling you too that several things happened at the same time would make you listen or if this makes you defensive." She looked at him. Steadily. "I need you to see it clearly. Without your filtering. To my feelings." I understood what she meant. Meaning. He understood. She felt humiliated by her own perception. Yes. If she had come to him in January, before this happened, he admitted, in his narrative, that she had been validated. Victoria was still intact. Still there. He would question Claire's room. Motive. He would always find a way to blame her. "You protected me," he said. "That was my own reaction." She said she protected the company. Then it fell silent. "Yes. I think I protected you too. The old habit." She glanced at her watch. "I have to go," she said. "Claire." He chanted her name like a mantra. A question he didn't know how to answer. She stopped. She glanced back at him. Her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the performative apology that was taking shape in his mind, but a carefully crafted strategic version that opened a door, revealing only the middle. "I'm deeply sorry for what I said to him before. It was all for you. 5 years since we last met." She stared at him for a long time. A moment. "I know," she said. Then. "But Daniel." The apology was just the beginning. It wasn't that she rewrote the story, but that she turned and left. Completely. "I had lived with a man for 5 years. And he made me feel smaller every day. I noticed he was doing it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dwelling on it anymore. But I was done." She stared at me. I'd really had enough. She walked toward the meeting room. He stood in the hallway and let her go. At 11:15. Victoria Hayes arrived at Whitmore Properties without prior notice to lobby. Daniel was in his office when Richard appeared in the doorway, that expression that had become his default expression in the past 48 hours. "Downstairs," Richard said. "The front desk called. They wanted to know if they should send her away." Daniel hadn't received a text from Victoria. 2 days to reply. He had been following Philip's instructions. Absolutely no contact. He had always been proud of himself. Disciplined about it. Looking at Richard now. Something different welled up. He. Not her. The feeling that had once attracted him. The attraction that had once acted on. The attraction that had embarrassed him for 14 months. Consistency. Something colder. Something that was part anger. Part. After a moment. He felt himself coming to terms with clarity. He thought of that $4.70. A million. He remembered his signature. He hadn't even looked at those documents. He thought about the days when Victoria walked into his life with those shell companies and their Delaware registration completed in 90 days. Based on her confidence and assessment. He thought too narrowly. He thought of Claire's 8 months of silence. The discipline of that silence. The patience. And the factual evidence she had gathered instead of accusations because she used documents instead of drama. She wanted to be sure. She wanted to be right. She wanted the company. Even though her marriage had broken down, she had survived collapse. Victoria walked into his room because she had entered the office building without prior notice, accustomed to walking into spaces like she owned them, yet found no one stopping her. "Tell the receptionist to send her away," Daniel said. "And then they said she wasn't allowed in. The future would revolve around this building." Richard's expression shifted slightly. Not unexpectedly, but certainly not adjacent to the relief facility. "Okay," he said. He reached for his phone, but Richard had just pressed the call button when his desk phone rang. Connecting to the internal line. This meant another trip to the lobby. He answered. Listened for 4 seconds. His jaw tightened. She was already. "Elevator," he said. Daniel stood up from the elevator. He walked to his desk. Then to the office door. He opened the door and stood in the hallway. Then waited. 20 seconds after the elevator doors opened, Victoria Hayes emerged. Composed and impeccably dressed. Wearing her expensive, special armor. She exuded an expression of expectation for the room to be rearranged, a power in itself for the woman. She stopped when she saw this. He stood there, blocking the hallway. She immediately adjusted. He watched her do as she did. Watched her briefly adjust. The shift in her eyes. The script she was writing about the encounter according to a new interpretation. "Daniel," she said. Her voice warm and welcoming. She wanted to use the cash register closer. "I've been trying to contact you." "I know," he said. "Stop." She stopped. The two people on either side of the executive desks in the hallway seemed still preventing the commuters from knowing they were witnessing something significant, not to be missed. Building access control regulations are being developed. "Things have changed today," Daniel said. "Your consulting contract with the company is terminated immediately. Any attempts to access company records will be directed to our legal team for further notice." He kept his voice moderate. Not loud. "I suggest you keep in touch with your lawyer before the end of the day." Victoria's face shifted several times. Things were moving quickly. Unexpectedly, genuinely. Because she hadn't expected him to move so fast. Then there was the recalibration. The mental search to find that angle that still existed. And then, when she didn't find it, she thought. Closer to the real Victoria Hayes than anything he'd seen in the last 14 months. Cold calculation. Devoid of warmth. "You made a mistake," she said. "I've told him he's been making mistakes. I was trying to stop the document from being generated by Ms. Bennett. It wasn't what she claimed it was. I can explain every transaction." The very fact that she called Claire was shocking. Ms. Bennett. Specifically dismissed among them. Claire was demoted to the surname and registration category. Daniel like a lit match. "Her name was," he said. "Claire. And I've seen the document." Victoria stared at him as he counted to 3. She was evaluating. And he realized it. Instead of frantically evaluating. Even now. Even here. She was looking for the play. The Hayes family held important. She said. Relationships were crucial in this market. Her voice lowered. Becoming almost silent. Which only made it more threatening if she brought it up. "You won't be the first to discover these relationships could be assets or liabilities. Depending on how you choose to handle it." It was a threat in the language of business. But it was a threat nonetheless. Daniel felt something settle inside him. Not calm. Yes. But it had to be resolved. The resolve of someone who had reached a certain level. In a dire situation. Yet found himself with ground beneath his feet. "You should contact your lawyer," he repeated. "Right now. Today. That's really the only advice I can give you." He went back to his office. He closed the door. He stood behind it for a moment. His hand still on. He reached out. Listening to the sounds in the hallway. He heard the crisp sound of Victoria's high heels. Floor. Heading towards the elevator. He heard the elevator doors open and close. He exhaled. He called Philip and told him what had happened. "Okay," Philip said. "Handled well. I'll document this interaction." Document. Pause. "Daniel. Anything else?" The forensic team produced a preliminary finding this morning. Daniel sat down. "Tell me. These transfers are more extensive than initially documented." Claire's analysis captured the major movements. But the forensic team discovered other earlier, smaller transactions. "This trend dates back 18 months. Not 7 months. Philip's voice was cautious. implying that Victoria had begun reallocating funds 4 months before Claire first discovered the irregularities. Daniel handled the matter. How is the current total estimated at $7.2 million? He laid his hands flat on the floor, leaning against the table. $7.2 million transferred within 18 months left his company as he shook hands during meetings and told people he was a self-made man. The board was meeting Friday. Philip said, I think you need to be prepared for the possibility that they will request a formal review of the administrative governance, which may include a temporary suspension of your powers pending the completion of the forensic examination review. Suspension? Danielle said decisively. This is not a termination of contract. This would serve as a protective measure. The company and the board would be exempt from liability during the review period. It will only require a forensic review to confirm that you were unaware of your involvement in the transfer. Daniel said. That's right. Because that's the truth. I believe you, Philip. He said. But the board needs this process to confirm. That's their job. Beat. And one more thing to note. No. Daniel waited a moment. Bennett Global's legal team stated, Claire is ready to assume an interim position. The term of the company's chairman is crucial for the stability of the leadership if the board deems it essential during the review. There was a silence. Interim chairman Daniel said. This will be an interim position. Governance issues have been resolved until the review is complete. Philip paused. Daniel. Purely from a practical point of view. She had qualified people present. The board's current confidence. Her understanding of the company's financial situation was deeper by any measure than anyone else's. At this moment, Daniel thought of her. Sitting at the head of the table that morning. His table. His chair. And the felt blanket overcoming anger and shock and the complex and shameful experiences of the past 3 years. Something unexpected had happened in the past few days. Not entirely accepting. But something. Its direction. She knew his company better than he did. He spent 5 years not asking her about herself. She spent 5 years learning everything about, at least in his world, what would happen on Friday. He said. If the board votes to suspend an interim chairman, you'll step down temporarily. Philip said. You'll cooperate with the review. You're next. Prove it with your actions. In a few weeks, you'll be removed from the transfer program, and your response to it will be responsible. Other suspensions. Then you'll let the process run its course. Daniel looked at the wall of his office. The framed wall of his company, with photos and medals documenting 9 years of construction, had always been considered entirely his own work. He thought of that page. 3 documents in Claire's folder. 18 months of handwritten notes on them. He thought of his mother. Both. And these things were real. I thought of Claire in the hallway. Morning. I've really had enough. Okay. He said. Okay. You'll cooperate. Okay. Daniel said. It's all true. Whatever the board decides on Friday, I'll cooperate with the review. If they decide that because they're ill, then step back. He paused. Philip made sure the board knew I wouldn't object. Claire, in whatever capacity, was involved to judge whether it was appropriate. Philip was silent for a moment. I'll communicate, he said. Then his tone was like this, very close to personal relationships. Just like Philip. What Morton ultimately got. It was the right decision. Daniel. He hung up. The office was very quiet. He sat quietly for a long time. Motionless. He looked at his phone as he walked. A lack of urgent drive had defined every day of the past 9 years. He sat, letting the silence envelop him. It really was. And it was very uncomfortable. The problem wasn't solved. But there was no honesty. His life wasn't like that. A long, long time ago. He thought of that man. He was also at the anniversary celebration. It was the performance. The careful stage setup. The microphone. The practice of the passion he would project in his opening remarks about the cruel twist of fate. He had rehearsed that moment. He had thought about it for weeks. He had stood before 70 people. People confidently declaring that he believed in his own story. That he completely considered his wife worthless. And she had always been, all his quiet infrastructure. He'd called him. Something had broken down deep inside him. Something had finally opened up. He was completely immersed in the silence of the office. 41st floor. It wasn't money. Not $4.7 million. Not $7.2 million. Not a shell company. A legal audit. Or a Friday board meeting. It was a marginal note. Her 18 months of handwritten balance sheets on the edge of his book. Not to expose him. Not to provide a reason for a dramatic board meeting. But simply because she had seen the work that had to be done. She had done it quietly in the dark. Without credit or recognition or understanding. So no one could see it. It was him. It was her. And he stood before 70 people. People said she was bankrupt. He urged himself on. Hands covering his face. Standing outside the window. 41 floors below. Chicago had moved on. As always. Indifferent to individual rational thought. There was a vast, gray, and old place by the lake. The city functioned as usual. Business. Daniel Whitmore sat alone in his nameless office. And from there, for the first time in years, he could accurately measure the work done. Understand exactly what he had built and what he had actually destroyed. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday. 9 o'clock. Claire arrived at 8:15. She arrived early not to signify anything, but because she always arrived early. That was something her grandfather Henry had owned. She had been taught to do it when she was 11. Sitting across from him at the long Bennett family office desk in New York, he explained, in a patient and precise way, everything about arriving early. This difficult meeting wasn't a power struggle. It was a matter of discipline. It meant you had to prepare the night before. Not in the morning. It meant you walked into the room already settled. While others were still searching for their footing. She had finished her preparations the night before. She sat in the first 20 years. In a meeting room that only held these meetings. A few minutes later, her file box opened. In front of her were notes and a cup. She actually drank the coffee. She went over the agenda again. She pondered what she needed to say, what she didn't need to say, and where she was. The line between the two was, because Claire Bennett had learned so much over the years. Watching her grandfather and her father move around in rooms like this. One of the most important lessons in a crucial meeting is understanding what is key. Omitted. Richard arrived at 8:35. He stopped at the door. Saw her. And then she came in and sat down in 2 chairs. She got down without being told. "What are you doing?" he said. It was that simple. The question. And the real one. The way it landed was quite different from what she had expected. She looked at him. "I'm doing better than before," she said. "I thought I would. But I feel like this means I'm all right." Richard nodded slowly. He held a cup of coffee in his hand. And he turned it over as if something had crossed it while he was thinking. "I want you to know something," he said. "I mean, as someone who has worked with, I understand. Daniel has been here for 9 years. So you know where it comes from. Go ahead," she said. "I should have looked at the financial situation more closely," he said. Caldwell's transfer. Some of the flags were there if someone had looked for them. I didn't look." He put down his cup. "I trust these summary reports. I trust Daniel's interpretation of Victoria's work." He paused. "That was my failure too, wasn't it?" "Only him." Claire looked him over carefully. "Richard. You don't know about that shell. The company. No. But I should have asked. More questions about the consultation arrangements. About how many people she can reach." "Yes." He shook his head. "I like her. I think she's shrewd. I got it in my workflow." "You mean it's because you feel responsible?" "I'm telling you this because you deserve all of this. Knowing what's going on in this company isn't just Daniel's blind spot. It's collective." He met her gaze. "And because if you're going to sit at the head of this table today, you should know exactly who's sitting around it and what they've missed. It's the most honest thing to do." Anyone connected to Whitmore's property in the last 5 years had told her. She felt it gradually seeping into her body. The particular weight of an item as a gift is precisely because it is expensive. Give it something. "Thank you," she said. And sincerely. The board members arrived between 8:40 and 8:55. Philip Garrett was the first to reach the finish line. And he nodded. Claire, with a man's characteristic caution and respect, readjusted her posture and sat in her usual spot. No comment. Susan Chin came in, ending a call mid-conversation. She sat down and looked at Claire. A decision had been made and settled and based on someone's direct assessment. James Whitfield and Karen Okerford arrived as well. This was unusual. And Karen had also affected Claire. A fleeting expression in her eyes conveyed a message too complex to be expressed in words. A single perspective, yet contained at its core unity. Daniel arrived at 8:58. He came in alone. There was no lawyer. Philip Morton, who was also present, but sat alone to the side. The wall. the lawyer's position more prominent than the principal's. Daniel looked like a man who didn't sleep well. Unmistakably. Like someone who possessed. Claire also decided to do something. She recognized him because she recognized his face. The way you recognize someone's face. For 5 years. We've been watching from across the table. He came in looking straight at her. He said, "Good morning, Claire." "Good morning, Daniel," she said. He sat down. She's not sitting at the head of the table. Noticing. He chose to sit to the side. Among the board members. The leader's chair remained. His chair. Which had been vacant for 9 years until she moved in. That matter had cost him. Something. She could tell that it had cost him. The matter. And the fact that he had done it. In short. It had left an imprint on a part of her memory. He had tried to remain professional and not entirely successfully. She moved up to the leader's table. She announced the start of the meeting. The first 40 minutes were procedural steps. The forensic report was presented by the accounting department. The chief auditor. A meticulous woman named Dr. Anita Voss. Who possessed the following qualities: someone who had delivered difficult messages many times and had learned to do so. Without making any impact. Let the numbers take responsibility. The final figure was $7.4 million. 18 months of systematic rerouting through 4 shell companies. 2 of which later merged into an unlisted subsidiary in the Hayes Development District. After Dr. Voss finished speaking, the room fell silent. Philip Garrett said, "Has any law enforcement agency been notified?" "The documents were submitted yesterday afternoon," Claire said. "Our legal team, along with lawyers from Bennett Global, has complete documentation from all relevant agencies." "What is the current status of the Hayes case? What has been the family's reaction?" Susan Chen asked. "This morning, the Hayes Development Project legal team confirmed receiving the notification. No other communications have been received." Claire kept her voice down. "We were told this would be a process that would take weeks to complete. Not days." James Whitfield leaned forward. "How to recover the funds?" "That's what Claire said. We want to have a longer conversation. Our legal team is exploring all possible legal avenues. Options. I don't want to hand the board over to them. I can't verify these figures right now. All I can tell you is that the forensic leads are complete and documented. Every transfer record has a date, source, and is associated with a named entity. The picture of evidence is strong." Karen Okerford said softly. "Daniel's exposure and the changes in the room have affected the room's comfort." "Slightly. Everyone is watching carefully. Being with Karen or at the table, rather than with Daniel, has resulted in Daniel being more, rather than less, in the public eye." Claire looked straight at Daniel. Answered. "Forensic review confirmed the transaction was executed using authorized credentials and a signature template consultation arrangement set up by." She said there was no evidence Daniel had any understanding of the nature of the transfer. The documentation supported his belief that he had been misled. She paused. "I want to make this clear. I want this to be clearly documented." Daniel looked at her. His jaw was clenched. He stood motionless. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low. She met his gaze for a moment. Then she moved on to the next agenda item. This governance issue took 90 minutes. Philip Morton spoke on behalf of Daniel. Clearly and methodically articulated Daniel's case review with. He immediately terminated the Hayes consultation arrangement and the fact that his forensic findings inadvertently contributed to all transfers against any punitive measures, advocating for a structured transition period. He was excellent. Claire had always known Philip was excellent. The board asked questions. Tricky questions. The kind excellent board members ask when they fulfilled their responsibilities. Addressed oversight failures and control structures and what the company needs to look like moving forward to ensure this exposure doesn't happen again. When the interim leadership of this issue officially took over the table, it was Philip Garrett who did it. The movement. "I propose that Claire Bennett serve as interim executive chairman for the duration of the governance review with full operational authority, and that Daniel Whitmore be retained to provide advisory services during the review. Restoration of executive power depends on the completion of the review and the board vote." The motion was seconded by Karen Okafor. Philip's words had already flown off his lips. The vote was 6-0. Daniel did not vote on the governance review. Philip had advised him against participating in the movement. And he had agreed. He sat with his arms crossed. When voting, he lay flat on the table. After taking it, he nodded. once. Congratulations. He said, looking directly at Claire. You will be in charge of running it. Better than I have. The room remained very still. It was such an unguarded thing. Completely beyond management. For example, his usual way of operating in the performative domain was to have several board members look at him with an almost surprised expression. Richard sighed along the wall. Quietly. Claire looked at Daniel. Her eyes revealing a long pause. We'll run it together, she said. Say. That's always the better option. Something brushed across his face. She wouldn't let herself say its name. She moved to the last agenda item. After Philip left, the room was empty. Board members gathered around papers, talking quietly in pairs. They walked toward the door, where Richard was already. He nodded slightly, gesturing for Daniela to sit down, before finishing a long speech. A few minutes later, he stood up. He straightened his coat and said, I'll have my team send you the operating procedures. Submit a handover summary before the end of the day. She said. Thank you. He had walked past but eventually came out. Claire sat alone at the head of the table for exactly 4 minutes. She sat there, staring at the long empty table and the documents in front of her, feeling all the pressure of the week. Since she walked into this building, Wednesday morning, she was tired. Wasn't she? Tired. But still couldn't sleep well. And she certainly was. A deeper weariness lingered. The tension of holding such a large sum of money had persisted for so long. And the moment she put it down, she felt the first muscle aches of those responsible for holding the items. She thought about the anniversary party that night. About standing in the elevator with her phone to her ear. Her father's voice ringing out, We've always waiting for you, dear. About 5 years ago. The receding hairline. The fine erosions. The everyday experiences Daniel went through made her smaller. Yet she didn't realize she let it happen because she had loved him deeply and believed that the man she married in first grade still harbored 4 and 5 deep within him, the man he became 3 years later. She thought about it. She was a 24-year-old girl, walking down the steps of a plane taking off in Chicago. Her plan very simple, she wanted to find this. Almost naively. To see if anyone would love her. And love her for what? She already knew. Not so. This was the answer she had always hoped for. But it wasn't. A real answer. And the real answer she gave. Grandfather always said. Only what's worth searching for. Her phone rang. Father. She answered. Hey, Dad. How are you? Will it go? William Bennett's voice. Measured and controlled in every way, her former professional background observed it. It had a certain quality. She called me saying there was nowhere else to reach her. A softness. A special softness, the kind of softness parents try to hide from their children. They are genuinely worried. Everything's going well, she said. The vote was 6-0. Full operational authority. She heard him exhale. Okay. A pause. She thought of Daniel. Answering the question. He accepted. She said. Better than I expected. He's not a bad guy, William said cautiously. I'd like to be fair. He's an accomplished man. A bad choice. Yes, she said. That's accurate. Are you okay? He said, not the company. She thought of you. Asked seriously. Like her father always did. Considered. I think I will, she said. I think I need some time to let myself get tired. She paused for a moment. Yes. I think I should be okay. Come on. He said. Come home this weekend. Your grandmother has been asking about you. Every day since Wednesday. She smiled. The first time she had a full smile. A week later. She could feel it on her face. Tell her I'll be there on Saturday. I'll tell her. He paused. Claire. Yes. I'm so proud of you, he said. Not because of the company. Not because of the board vote. But because of who you are. His voice was steady. But she heard it. Below it. Your grandfather would have stopped. Then started again. He would have been so proud. Henry Bennett died 2 years after her. She cried after marrying Daniel. For 3 days. Daniel held her. Not quite understanding why he had hit her so hard. She couldn't explain it to him in his own way. Could hear. Henry was the first to teach her that quietness could be powerful and that invisibility was sometimes a choice. Not a failure. The most effective work often happens on the fringes of what no one is watching. She spent 4 years doing this. Just like that. She felt he might understand. Thank you, Dad, she said. See you Saturday. She hung up. She sat for a while. Then she opened the file folder, took out new legal paper, and began to write. First page. Top. Departmental structure preliminary explanation. This idea had been with her for months. Ever since before the anniversary party. Before the board meeting. And since then. During those long months of construction. Caldwell's records show she was sitting there. 2 in the morning. Alone at the kitchen table. Morning deal review records and thinking about everyone she knew who was building the real thing. Possessing real skills but being overlooked because they didn't have the right last name or the right investor around the corner or the right room entrance. She had seriously considered this. Someone's special power. She knew what the cost of being underestimated was. She now had a platform. She had resources. And authority and family name. She opened every room she wanted to go into. Entered. She had spent 5 years choosing not to use those things. She understood that now she could choose to hide her power. She came from a place that genuinely wanted to be loved without it. But this also came at a price. Making her. She got involved in it in a subtle way. Daniel told her story. She no longer hid. Not loudly. Not with. Daniel would make such an announcement with a microphone in hand. The audience assembled. She did all this quietly. But not entirely. She wrote for 20 minutes. When she put on her hat. That pen. She had something real in her bones. She packed up the files. Picked up the file bag. And left. Out of the meeting room. The actions taken in the weeks that followed were unlike anything she had ever done before. Claire owned property before her experience in Whitmore because her different approach to experience didn't come from the periphery of the room, but from the center. She kept the company's existing team largely intact. Which was surprising. Some had expected a nationwide sweep. Change. She retained Richard as COO. In their first one-on-one meeting. She told him that the meeting showed she needed someone who knew her operational history and that she needed him to be a bit stricter with financial controls than he had been before. And he agreed without hesitation. The man who had taken control of himself without a defensive posture was willing to take responsibility and was ready to do better. She restructured the consulting business. Engagement agreements. She implemented a deal requiring dual authorization exceeding $50,000. She hired an internal audit director. A woman named Grace Tanner, who came with a regulatory background and had a special gift, asking the uncomfortable question people had always felt comfortable not to ask. She met with each department head. Separately over the first 2 weeks. Not to project authority, she certainly had the ability, but to listen. She sat in their offices. Asking what they needed. What wouldn't work. And what they wanted. The company leadership understood their work. She took notes with one hand. And several of them were surprised. As if they hadn't expected it. The company leaders made sure to record what they said. She rebuilt trust. And she knew the importance of trust. It was slowly built up over time. She was humble. Kept her promises. And treated her patients well. The Bennett Global Department proposal was made in front of her father. The executive committee met with the board 6 weeks later. She had finished writing everything. The proposal itself. 42 pages of detailed financial projections and the proposed structure. And a list of the first 15 companies she intended to contact. Those high-performing companies work in urban development, affordable housing, education, technology, and small business financing. The companies are led by those who have defected, crushed by traditional investors. Not because their ideas are weak, but because they don't fit the model of well-funded institutions. She calls it the Bennett Emerging Leaders Fund. Her grandmother, Eloise Bennett, called her the night after her death. She distributed draft proposals. Eloise, who was 81, had always been quiet. For 50 years. The powerful forces behind Henry Bennett, Claire's upbringing, hadn't given her this feeling. Completely understood. Now completely understood. I've read your proposal, Eloise said. I know. Dad told me. The structure is solid, Eloise said. The projections are conservative. And it's a good first round. The selection criteria are clear. A pause. Your grandfather always said the best investment is in people. And the market has misjudged. I know, Claire said. He told you this when I was 12. Eloise said. Because he's been watching you. He's been thinking. Think about how you'll handle it. There was something unusual in her voice, a sadness. Not quite pride. But, living among them. He'll want you to know that all of this was expected of him. Not the strength you've shown. Not the choices you've made. Another pause. He used to say you were the one who understood you. What is the true meaning of this family? Claire. I pondered for a long time. I am just getting started, she finally said. I know you are, Eloise said. That's why it's so beautiful. Proposal approved 3 weeks later. Full funding. $40 million in the first round. A 5-year deal from Bennett Global and board seats. Claire gave her opinion on every company the fund invested in. She went in. When she received the official notification, she cried. Just the approval process alone took her about 4 hours in the office. She allowed herself a few minutes of respite, because it was her right. Then she washed her face, called her assistant, and said, arrange the first outreach event. She received the call Monday morning. Daniel had been attending the board meeting for 6 weeks when he saw her again. He had been adept at his consultative skills, and she was surprised by his presence. She had invited him to the meeting and provided the historical context she requested, refusing to participate in decisions she hadn't been involved in. She asked for his opinion. He was doing what she knew was harder. For Daniel Whitmore, what was harder was entering the room without authorization and acting as if it were no big deal. He did. He knocked on her door. Thursday afternoon. The office door. Do you have a few minutes? He asked. She glanced at the calendar. 10 minutes. She said. Sit down. He sat down. He had an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Not during their 5 years of marriage. Not 6 weeks after the last board meeting. It looked like absenteeism. I was sitting across from him. She wasn't wearing his armor, his confidence, or his forward-leaning ambition. She was just someone trying to figure everything out. Not knowing what to say. The Hay affair, he said. I heard about it from Philip this morning. The SEC had officially launched an investigation. I know, Claire said. A polite notification was copied to Tanner. They'd want to talk to me. Philip would be ready, she said. You were a victim. Daniel, you were involved in the fraud. The documents make that clear. You'll be fine. He nodded. He turned his hand over on his desk, a gesture she recognized. He'd been rehearsing just as he was about to speak. She waited. I don't say it. He just wants to be okay. I think you need to know I understand what happened. Not the legal version. The real version. He looked at her. You've been with me for 5 years. And I've been with you for 5 years. Years apart. I was absolutely certain I knew who you were. But I never truly knew you. Confirmed. He stopped. I was wrong. You excelled in every important aspect. And I'm sorry. Not for strategic reasons. Nor because it was helpful to my situation. I'm so sorry. She stared at him for a long time. I know. She said. I believe you. Don't I? Is that enough? He asked. I hope so, she replied. If it, I'll be even less trusting of it. Always holding on to hope. The way he asked the question was like a man would. He didn't really know the answer. And he asked because he needed to know. She considered how to answer truthfully. That's enough, she said. For me. Hearing and believing is enough. And that's how we move forward. It's not enough to change what's already happened. Or go back to the past. She met his gaze. I'm not angry with you. Daniel. Stop doing this. I want you to know that. But I'm not the same person I used to be. I won't go back to what we were like. Yes. She paused. I hope you can. You have to contribute to the future. That's yours. You stop. Start performing and being. She looked intently at him. You're capable of that. I've always thought you were capable of that. I can't really help you. You get there. Something changed in him. His face. You're a remarkable person, he said. Say it. Yes, she said. And then came out. Unfeigned humility. Because she had indulged herself for too long. Being belittled to a level she didn't deserve. She was tired of being insignificant. I know. He chuckled involuntarily. A short, involuntary laugh. It was more of a surprise than a joke. Then he stood up. Thank you, he said. For protecting the company. For protecting me even when he stopped protecting me. For all of it. You're welcome. She said. Please close the door when you leave. He did. She sat quietly in her office. Letting the conversation settle. She thought about the anniversary night, the party, the ballroom, the microphone, the clinking of the champagne glass as he raised it. He slammed the files to the floor. She thought about the elevator and her father, the sound, and the long, trembling breath she had allowed herself to take before stepping into the Chicago night. She had walked into that night unprepared, planning for the next 6 weeks. She already knew its shape, her family would come. The truth would come to light. The unseen work she had done would become visible. But she didn't know its texture, the exhausting board meetings, the specific weight of walking down the corridors. Those who had witnessed her, those who had been publicly humiliated, now watching her run the company. A complicated feeling of having done the right thing for the company. Naming it after a fired person, she was right to do it. Because anyone who worked there, anyway, should be a competent leader. The upper echelons were constantly shifting. She hadn't even known how painful it would be when she did it right. But she hadn't fully grasped just how big it really was either. It would feel like her. Because this was what happened at the anniversary party. And she hid it within cruelty. It had stripped away the last vestiges of adaptation. The final step of adjustment. And her own softening and self-shaping. Smaller. Leaving only her the unadorned truth of her. And who else could prove she was able to walk into the conference room? Having previously publicly discarded and presented over 4 years of meticulous financial work. Her voice unwavering. Recording everything. Once. Someone capable of running a company. Someone who knew the family name and its meaning and purpose. Someone she had always known her worth. Even when she allowed others to define it for years. The Bennett Emerging Leaders Fund was officially launched Tuesday morning. Following 8 weeks of board meetings. Claire stood in the Bennett Global Conference Room. On one side her father. On the other her grandmother Eloise, who had flown in. He had come from New York at 81 because she said she would never miss this opportunity. Anything ordinary. But this was not. On the other side was anything ordinary. And she gave a 12-minute speech on the amount and purpose of the fund. She spoke about the overlooked founders. She spoke about the gap between talent and opportunity. She spoke of this particular cruelty. The system for measuring potentials. You've been granted access to the room. She didn't talk about Daniel. She didn't talk about the anniversary party. Or the boardroom. Or the divorce papers on the table. Those were her private materials. Not stories she was telling publicly. But the people in the room. The investors. The journalists. Those young founders invited to witness the launch. She possessed a tangible weight. She said. The feeling that was coming was deep inside. Real and private. And it was that weight that made them lean forward. Listening. When she finished. Her grandmother, Eloise, reached out and took her hand. Giving it a gentle squeeze. With all her might, an 81-year-old woman who had lived so long. Enough to understand what she was doing. Witnessing it firsthand. Claire squeezed back. To the back of the room near the door. And noticed an unexpected face. Margaret. The CFO of Whitmore Realty. The lady who looked down at her shoes at the anniversary party. The room filled with laughter. She didn't laugh herself. Margaret met her gaze and nodded slightly. Without prejudice. Without apology. Just the recognition of a professional acknowledgement of another. Claire nodded. Outside the Bennett's window. The Chicago Global Headquarters was doing just that. Chicago's doing. Grand and dramatic. Indifferent to personal stories. Too big. Too old. Not worth being impressed by any reckoning. But Claire Bennett stood in front of the room. A room filled with a special energy, the beginning of everything. She felt this way. A feeling she hadn't had in a long time. A long time. Not relief. Not victory. Not even a vindication. Though she thought that was included. She felt it as she truly was. Completely. Utterly. Without apology or self-deprecation. And as she thought. The room began to tremble. She surrounded her. And her father reached out his hand. Leaning briefly on her shoulder. Eloise said something that had quietly brought the two of them together. The women around her laughed. It was this thing. Daniel Whitmore never succeeded. Even over the years. Drawing strength from her. When he tried. He didn't know he was trying. You can undermine someone's situation. You can reject their requests. Contributions. You can stand in front of 70 people and call them trash. But you can't take away from someone who they are. Claire Bennett, I've always known that. She's always been waiting for the right moment to show it. The morning the news spread across the country. Claire was in a meeting with 3 people. The fund's founders were from the first fund. The investor group. She didn't see them. Until her assistant knocked twice on the door, a glass door. Their prearranged signal. To do those urgent things. And without permission. Shove the tablet through the crack in the door. In. Claire excused herself to leave for 60 minutes. A few seconds. Read the headings. Read the first 3 paragraphs. Set up the tablet. She slumped face down in the chair next to her and returned to the meeting room. She finished the meeting. She took notes. She shook hands with the three founders. And I'm telling you the truth. Then she closed the door, picked up the tablet. The headline read, Bennett Harris has been in charge of covert operations for 4 years at her ex-husband's company. Full report. It was a financial matter. The journal was meticulously prepared. The information comprehensive. And whoever told them the story had been given enough information to ensure accuracy. 4 years of financial analysis of anonymous investment instruments. The Caldwell Papers. Board meetings. The appointment of the interim chairman, all summarized in 8,000 words. A publication whose content was not printed by a specific authority. It could not be verified. Her phone rang 12 times in the next 4 minutes. She had all the messages forwarded to voicemail. The 13th call was from her grandmother. Eloise. She answered. I've seen her. Before Claire could speak, Eloise interrupted. How are you feeling? Exposure, Claire said. After a moment and, very good. It's a strange combination. That's not surprising at all. Eloise said. It means you have nothing to be ashamed of. Yes. That's the right state to be in when the whole world is watching you. Pause. Your grandfather wrote about 3 times in the same publication. Each time he said that the only thing worse than being written into a book is being wrongly written. Because then you have no one to blame. Claire couldn't help but laugh. It sounded exactly like him. Call Eloise, the phone will be ringing all day. Say it. Answer the important questions. Let the others wait. You know the difference. She paused again, then spoke, turning to something more personal. Claire, I want you to hear me say this. Directly. What have you built in there? The company. The way you handle things. The discipline. The patience. And the care, that's the essence of the Bennett family way of doing things. Not money. Not fame. But that she stopped and showed her unique character. I'm 81 years old. I'm old. I've seen a lot of people try to do difficult things gracefully. Very few people could do what you did. Grandma. Claire said. Her voice barely audible. You're not allowed to cry. At work. Eloise said curtly. You can cry when you get home on Saturday. Claire pressed her lips together tightly. Yes, ma'am. Good girl. Eloise said. Now go answer the really important calls. By midday, the story had shifted from the financial media. For the general news cycle, this was a completely different animal. The financial media had covered the investment mechanism and governance story. The mainstream media had covered the marriage. They wrote about the anniversary party. Someone had obtained a cell phone video. Not a professional one. The footage was slightly shaky, taken from near the back of the room. And it had been posted and shared enough times in the previous hour that it became something that had ever existed in the world. Something anyone looking for could see. Claire only watched it once. She looked at herself standing next to Daniel in the ballroom. She looked at him pushing documents around on the table. She looked at herself picking up a pen. She looked at the expression on her face. The viewfinder of her phone camera uncertain. Searching for a feeling from her memory. Calm. Sadness. Relief. She found she could see it simply by looking. Caution. This wasn't dramatic. It really wasn't. It was impossible to film a compelling television show like Tears Would Fall. The quality of a woman signing documents. The focus she exuded. If you know what to look for. I've told you. About what was happening inside her. She looked once. And then never looked again. Again. Her assistant, Marcus, appeared at the door. He was 27. Anne. I've worked for her for 3 weeks and am already one of the most organized people. She'd encountered this situation before. And she thanked him. He had received an interview request. He spoke while holding a printed list. 17 so far. And the number increased every 20 minutes. I marked the ones I thought were more serious. She looked at the list. The marked ones were legitimate. Those kinds of shops would allow her to speak freely. No cuts. Straight to the deepest dramatic moments. Tell them I'll have it in 2 weeks. She said. An interview. A media outlet. I'll decide which one to get done by the end of the week. Marcus nodded and said. A note. The others politely declined. Standard language. She said. There's one more thing. Marcus said. He hesitated. Blocking someone's way. Providing them with information they weren't sure how to frame it. A PR person from Daniel Whitmore contacted me this morning. They asked if I would be willing to keep both sides' statements consistent in order to coordinate the communication. So neither side has said anything. Anything that complicates the legal process. Claire put down her pen. She thought for a full 4 minutes. Seconds. Tell them I'm not involved in the coordination work. Communicate with Daniel's team. She said my communications will be accurate and professionally appropriate. Meaning they won't complicate the legal process. The legal process. That's all for the coordination work. I'm willing. She picked up her pen. Again. That's it. Got it. Marcus said. Then he left. She went back to work. This afternoon brought her something she hadn't expected. Unsurprisingly, Margaret called. Margaret, the finance director of Whitmore Corporation, Chin Real Estate, hadn't called her since then. Board meeting. Their interactions since then had been more professional and limited. Margaret had worked at the company. Claire had been the interim chairman. And the relationship was just right for the formality of the arrangement. The Nodding Fund launch ceremony had been like this until now. Their most private communication had been completed. Margaret called number 247. I wish I could just call directly. Margaret said. I got your number from Richard. It's okay. Claire said. What happened? I've been thinking about why I haven't called since the board meeting. Margaret said her voice had that quality that always held someone in it and decided to put it in. Down. I haven't called because I don't know what to say. Then this report came out today. And I thought. I need to say it before I'm ready. Claire waited quietly. At the party. Margaret said. At the anniversary party, when Daniel said those words. She stopped. I laughed. Don't say it out loud. I didn't laugh out loud. But I felt myself almost laughing. Then I stopped. I looked at myself. And then at your face. I felt nauseous. Her voice was steady. But tight. I spent 3 weeks thinking about why I almost laughed out loud. And then I realized I almost laughed out loud. Because everyone around me was reacting. So I walked around the room. I thought about it independently. And that's when she stopped again. I don't want to be that kind of person. I want you to know I'm sorry. Really. You deserve better. The room. Claire paused for a moment. Margaret said. Thank you. Tell me. That takes courage. This is all I could do. Margaret said no. Claire said. You could at least do this. Nothing. Lots of people do it. Now. She paused. You. It's harder to do. I'm grateful. Hit. Then. As soon as Margaret finished speaking, her voice was almost probing. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. How did you manage all 4 years? Dealing with these financial figures. Knowing what you know. Watching everything happen. How did you stay patient? Claire considered how to answer honestly. I wasn't always patient. She said. Say. Some nights. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning reviewing transaction records, not angry. Just a little, heavier than anger. Something. She picked up the phone to call my father. Who said. Come pick me up. I'm done. She paused. But then I thought, this company. And the people who work there. People who have nothing to do with anything. It's about doing things right. Not quickly. She exhaled slowly. I'll write another note in the margin. Then go to sleep. You protected those people I didn't even know you were protecting them. That's work. Margaret said. When you have that ability. The ability to protect something is an obligation. That's what my grandfather taught me. That's it. Margaret was silent for a moment. I want to learn from you. She said. If it's appropriate to say it. I think. There's an opportunity in that if you're there at work. There will be an opportunity. Claire said. Say. I'll make sure you understand. After hanging up. She sat for a moment. A moment later. I remembered Margaret's description. Almost laughing. Observing the room before thinking. For her own sake. She had witnessed it all. That night. I truly felt the wave. The room spun in a certain direction. Even in that moment. I understood that for most of those accompanying me. This wasn't cruel. They simply weren't focused enough to resist temptation. That's the cruelty of disguise. As performance. It moves quickly and doesn't expect people to have time to think things through. She picked up the legal paper she was holding and wrote at the top, new page. Leadership training course. Year 1-inch ethical decisions under social pressure. She would add to the foundation's leadership development program. Every bad thing she learned was also material. The SEC investigation into Victoria Hayes was more aggressive than anyone publicly predicted. Claire later learned. Because her team had a package of documents. The submission. In words. Was to contact their investigators' legal team. The most complete initial evidence package we had received, the first case of its kind in 11 years. She did hear that. And she didn't feel smug. She felt a particular kind of exhaustion from people who had done a lot of work. Done precise and meticulous work. And were being closely watched. Completing it was built for a purpose. Completing this was certainly satisfying. But not so exciting. The satisfying way is to do it well. To make it work perfectly. Doing it well is fulfilling in itself. Victoria Hayes formally filed charges at a board meeting 14 weeks later. The charges included wire fraud, securities fraud, and default fiduciary duty. The Hayes Development Project subsidiary was frozen for investigation for some reason. The Hayes family's legal team issued a statement saying, "Nothing said. Yet so valuable." Claire's reading of the indictment became public record. She read them the way she read all the financial and legal documents, meticulously, without skipping a single one. When she finished, she closed the file, set it to the completed drawer, and moved on to the next place, her desk. She didn't speak publicly about the charges. When asked about it, her communications team released a statement. "We have complete confidence in the legal aspects. I am very grateful for the entire process and the meticulous and thoughtful service. The investigating agency." 8 words powerful. Everything else was professional courtesy. She didn't say it publicly. Only once to her. That's how her father was. "I don't want her to be destroyed. I want her to take responsibility." Those are two different things. William had seen him stare at her for a moment. Then say, "What your grandfather said. Almost the same description of a certain situation that I wouldn't have, to make you feel bored." He paused. Then said, "The target is always the institution, not the individual. Justice serves the institution. Revenge only benefits the person seeking it." "I remember," Claire said. "I know you certainly know," he said. "I just wanted to remind you that you came here honestly." 12 weeks after the Bennett incident, the Emerging Leaders Fund launched. Claire was standing in a conference room on Chicago's West Side. Across the table from a woman named Deja Morris. Deja was 34 years old and had spent 6 years training financial literacy with former partner institutions for incarcerated women re-entering the workforce. The organization had a track that any serious person would consider a record. The results were remarkable. 73% of participants were fully employed within 6 months, compared to the national average of 31% who completed the program in a few months. She had been rejected by 11 investors in the past 2 years. She sat across the street from Claire in the posture of rejection so many times that she had built up an armor of hope against the attack. A professional meeting. But another rejection before a positive answer. An opportunity to arrive. Claire knew that posture. She had worn a similar style. She had Deja present it without her presence. An interruption. Deja was prepared to be careful. The data was accurate. The logic was sound. The program design showed that someone's way of thinking not only understood that she needed participants, but also why they needed them. It also revealed the factors that were holding them back. Once she finished, she began. Her hands were flat on the table. The way someone spoke, everything they were about to say, was waiting. "The 11 investors who will change your life," Claire said. "Go down," she said. "What are their reasons for doing this?" 4. Deja blinked. She had clearly anticipated someone asking that question. "Financial data," she said. "Mainly a matter of scale. They said the target market was too large and the scope too narrow. And the group we serve was too risky." She paused. "One of them said, and I'll quote him directly, 'We don't usually invest in projects where demographics are inherently unreliable.'" The room fell silent. "Essentially," Claire said, "it's unreliable." "Yes," Deja said. "Do you know what your project is?" "The repayment rate depends on microfinance." "Ingredients?" Deja looked slightly surprised. 91%. 91%. What was Claire's opinion on the national average for microfinance? "About 67%. Deja said slowly. "So the population and investor loan repayments are inherently unreliable. 24 percentage points higher than the national average and the industry average." Claire watched her move forward steadily. "That investor isn't reading your data. They're reading their assumptions." Something seemed to change on Deja's face. A slight crack appeared in the armor. "Nothing's broken. Just moved." "I thought so too," Deja said quietly. "I didn't know what to say at the time. In a room like this, it sounded quiet. Defensive." "You don't have to say that room," Claire said. "You're not in that room anymore." She opened the folder in front of her. I want to discuss the first round of funding. We're looking at a 2-year contract. With a few months of evaluation at 18. The amount in my mind is. She slid a sheet of paper across the table. Dejao looked at that page. She looked up. Her eyes sparkled. Just like her. Trying to control. It was 3 times I asked, she said. I know. Claire said. Because what you're asking is what you might get calibrated according to your ideas. It's based on what your program really needs to be scalable. Her gaze was fixed ahead. There's a difference. You should always ask for what you want. It really is necessary. Dejao pursed his lips together. She nodded. Just like that. A woman wouldn't cry at a professional meeting and handle things entirely by willpower. Why do you do this? This. There was no doubt in her tone as she said, really. Why set up this fund? Why these companies? Claire considered how to answer. Because I spent years. She said cautiously. And people in those rooms made all sorts of assumptions about what kind of person I was. Judging my value based on my appearance and external circumstances. Based on their expectations rather than what they actually saw. She looked at Dejao. I know what the price is. And I have the ability to change it. For some people, that ability is an obligation. Dejao was silent for a moment. Someone taught you this, she said. My grandfather, Claire said. He was a very wise man. Mine too, Dejao said. Then, she broke into her first full smile. It had been evident since she walked into the room. I think they'll get goodbye. Claire smiled back. I think so. Yes. The formal paperwork took 3 weeks. After it was signed, Deja Morris sent Claire a handwritten note. On real paper. A real fountain pen. Delivered by a messenger. He said. You saw it. Thank you. She put it in her desk. She kept it in the drawer under her legal papers, her work notes. The one she was most proud of. Her newest work. Not governance structures. Not financial forecasts. Not board work. Not media coverage. Not professional acclaim. Not calls from industry insiders now wanting to attend meetings they didn't want to attend before. 6 months ago. That note in her desk. In a woman's drawer. She had been told number 11 times. But he had stuck to it. That was the purpose of the fund. After the 6-month anniversary party, Daniel Whitmore requested a meeting. Not through a lawyer. Not through him personally. A PR person. Email her assistant directly. Brief and specific. I want Claire to have 30 minutes with her convenient. I have something I want to say in person. It's not about the company. She had Marcus put it on Thursday afternoon schedule. He told her he'd be there on time. Daniel wasn't someone who'd ever had a similar experience before. Prioritizing anyone's punctuality. Besides those he considered important. The fact that he arrived exactly on time was recorded as a data point of where he felt he was. He sat down opposite her. He looked better than he'd done in the last few weeks. The board meeting was immediately after it ended. Not the polished, armored version of himself that he used to be. Something more stable. Something more masculine. He no longer avoided his own reflections. I've been in therapy. He said. He said it directly. Without any reservation. This opening was unlike his usual style. His usual style was step by step. The board meeting, which happened about 4 weeks later, was 3 times a week. He looked down at his hands. I've been trying to understand how I became that kind of person. What I did at that party. Who did what. It took 5 years to accomplish. He looked up. I'm not telling you this because it will change anything. I know it won't. I'm telling you because you deserve to know I do real work. Not just legal work. Claire looked at him. I said I was glad. And genuinely so. The therapist asked me when I first started measuring a person by what they possessed. He said. Not their true identity. I spent 2 class periods thinking about that. To be honest. I don't remember. There was a time when I didn't. He paused. Which means I possessed that trait long before you. I'm sorry you were the one who found it when you were the closest to it. Who it was in full expression. This was the most honest thing she'd heard him say in 6 years. More honest than an apology in the hallway. More honest than anything in a marriage. She felt something settle down. Not exactly forgiveness. Because forgiveness is a grander, deeper emotion. A process more private than a Thursday afternoon meeting. But something beside her. She unloaded her burden. She didn't know she was pregnant at the time. Thank you for telling me, she said. I have one more thing to tell you. He said. He reached into his coat. A file in the pocket. The table. This is my formal resignation letter. A transition from a consultant role. Effective 30 years from today. She looked at the document. You don't have to do that. She said. I know, he said. That's why I'm doing it. Because I want to. Not because I have to. He met her gaze. You need to be able to run the company without me. Even with a reduced workload. I'm still a complication. People don't know how to be completely themselves in front of me because they're all watching both of us. That's not good for the company. He paused. To be honest. It's not good for me either. I need to build something. That's really mine. But not for maintenance. Building is not recommended. He leaned back. I have some ideas. I want to test them. If it weren't for the burden of this history, the room. She stared at him for a long time. A moment. What kind of ideas? She asked. A strange look flashed across her face, recognizing the energy of his rapidly advancing ambition. That first. She had been interested in charity galas many years ago. But things were different now. His appetite had decreased. His goals were clearer. And he was smaller. He said. Much more than I had. Much smaller. 3 people. Maybe 4. A specific. Affordable business niche market development on the south side. Work, I actually know how to do it with my hands. Not just management structures. He paused. Meaningful work. Not just doing what can be scaled. She thought about what he had just described. She thought about Deja Morris's notes in her desk drawer. She remembered her grandfather's voice rising, saying, competence is duty, and thinking about what this meant for Daniel, why not build something here rather than crave attention, was driven more by a desire to be seen than by a desire to be noticed. That sounds perfect for you, she said. He nodded. He stood up. He held out his hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief. And as he released it, he stepped back, picked up his jacket, and looked at her with a hint of something in that expression that might stay with him. Something, sadness and gratitude. Something indescribable. But she was considered a specific expression of someone who fully understood. And ultimately, how much they had lost. Claire. Take care of yourself. He said. You too. Daniel. She said. He left. After he left. She sat for a while. She sat. Taking deep breaths. Letting the 6 of them, months. All of it, the parties and papers. The board meetings and funds. The news cycle. The SEC and Deja's notes and Margaret's phone calls. And her grandmother's voice saying, try crying in the workplace. She let all of this happen at once. Simply for an instant. Without managing or moving forward. Then she opened her desk. A drawer. She took out legal papers with a note. She kept her work notes and looked at the top of the current page. First-year reader group course, ethics. Decision-making. Social pressure. She added another line below it. What is the cost of silence? Speaking and the changes it brings. She put on her cap and pen. She looked out the window at the city. The window. Late spring in Chicago was special. The lake was changing color. This season had changed the energy. The streets were turning in a wider direction. Open. More willing. Like a long winter finally loosening. She had loved the city from the first day she arrived. At 24. She was anonymous. She was completely herself. Except, nothing else. She decided to use this surname temporarily. Do not use it. She was no longer anonymous. She was no longer temporary. She was Claire Bennett. Interim chair of Whitmore Realty. Founder of the Bennett Emerging Leaders Program. Director of the foundation. Daughter and granddaughter of a family that had created something of value. She inherited the estate when she was 38. She was just getting started. Her phone rang. It was her father. I heard him say. The advisory committee. They want to discuss expanding the fund's geographic reach. New markets. Detroit. Cleveland. And maybe Atlanta too. Tell them I'll have a plan, she said. It'll be ready by the end of the month. He said. I've already told them you will. She could hear the smile in his eyes. His voice. I've never misjudged you. You've made mistakes, she said. You think I should stay home. I was wrong. He had confirmed it once. You're right. Go. You need to figure this out yourself. He paused. Are you happy? Not professionally. Are you happy? She thought about it seriously. Her father's questions always well-deserved. She remembered the note. In her drawer. About Eloise's hand squeezing hers at the press conference. About Margaret's voice, you deserve. Much better than that room. Regarding Daniel. A smile appeared on his face when he said, "Take care of yourself. You." The words, carrying all their weight, now carried weight. She remembered the girl who had once been her, 24 years old, stepping off the plane with a plan already made. It was simple, almost naive. She wanted someone to love her for who she was. She hadn't found that in her marriage. But she found something else. Something unique to her. Something no one else could have. What this relationship could have given her. It hadn't. Losing her would cost her dearly. She found her unadorned version. This woman who worked on the fringes. Who built things in the dark. Who carried 4 years of invisible labor. In the notes of a balance sheet. And then walked into a boardroom where he simply stated the facts. She finally figured out who she really was. There was no one around then. And it turned out. Always had been. She was good enough. More than enough. Accurate. Complete. And without any alteration of herself. Yes. She said to her father. "I'm truly happy." "Okay." He said softly. "That has always been the only goal." She hung up. She picked up the phone. Her pen. She went back to work. Because Claire Bennett was not saved by her revelation of her family name or her broken husband's pride or public pride. The truth of 4 years of invisibility was finally revealed. Work. She knew her own worth and always cherished it. Silently spent 5 years in the time of someone else's denigration and then left. Tuesday night. A phone call in the elevator. And then the process of showing her to the world began. I already knew. Danielle Whitmore was called bad. But she was never bad. She had always been waiting for the patience of someone who understood this. The right moment was not discovered by chance, but created. In a day of careful, honest, and documented time. And when that moment came, she did not carry it out. She did not announce it. She just walked in. Completely immersed in it calmly. Without hesitation. A woman's authority. She knew very well who she was.